Well, welcome. My name is Russ Mead. I'm the Shared Earth Visiting Professor at Lewis and Clark in the Center for Animal Law Studies. And years ago, when this conference wasn't the size of this conference, we were trying to decide, hey, should we offer something to the practicing lawyers to allow them to have the magic 1 hour ethics CLE credit? And we came up with this format, many years ago. So if you've been to one of these before, you know the format I'm going to use, and it goes like this. First off, I consider myself an animal rights lawyer, and I will tell you that we often, as lawyers who are advocates, break the rules of professional responsibility. So I'm going to remind us that all the lawyers in the room and the law students, we're bound by everything in this big book. And this big book is the Bible of every way you can lose your bar license. And I'm here to have you not be a person that ever has to pull this book out. So the format is I've got this fictitious lawyer advocate, Billy Miller, and ever since the first one of these, we've got to know Billy really well as she does all kinds of crazy things. And so we're going to go through a hypothetical, but this is unlike any ethics or professional responsibility CLE you've ever seen before, because we're going to break into groups. We're going to have 3 different sessions. I'm going to give you a bit of a story. We're going to break. You're going to talk amongst yourselves about all of the things that you might see that Billy has done that might violate one of those things in that big, thick book. And then we're going to come back, do a readout, and then we will push on. Now, the purpose of this is not to give you the absolute detail of the rule of professional responsibility. What I'd like you to do, the success from my standpoint, is if you find yourself in a situation and you think, oh, that's one of those things Russ talked about, that you do grab the book or you call a lawyer that specializes in this, or you figure out if you have a problem. So the purpose of this is real tongue-in-cheek. The violations are going to be flagrant. They're not going to be down looking at the minutia of this, so that you'll remind yourselves when you see it, uh-oh, I better stop and slow down. So with that, here's the controversy. Out there on Highway 21, Mitch McElvoy keeps a chimp named CJ in an outdoor cage. No, CJ's not, a friend to this at all. He's kind of the villain. CJ the chimp was used in medical research and then was rescued, and I put rescued in air quotes because CJ ended up locked up in a small cage in this backyard. Now we're going to have several players in this saga. First is Billy Miller. Billy Miller is a lawyer who loves animals, and she calls herself an animal rights lawyer, like I call myself an animal rights lawyer, and something you might consider calling yourself. But Billy is really a beer lawyer. In the Pacific Northwest, there's all of these small brew pub things that are popping up in almost alleys anymore, in warehouses, and she represents those folks. So if you've got one of these facilities, she's their lawyer. Billy is a master at social media. She's got a website for the beer practice. She's got a podcast on laws that are affecting small brewery operations. She has a Facebook account which will tell you more than you ever wanted to know about her personal life. And she has a blazing hot Twitter account that she runs on animal rights issues. Now, the last player doesn't play that big of a role, but I have to include her dog, Petunia. Petunia is, well, it's kind of hard to describe. She's part pit bull, you can see that. And the other part, labradoodle, maybe? I mean, it's just hard to say what Petunia is, but Petunia goes everywhere. The next important person in this story is a person that I patterned after, Greta in terms of climate warning. She's 16 years old. She's an advocate, and her name is Molly Mayberry. Molly is CJ the chimp. Remember, CJ's in this backyard. Molly is CJ's biggest champion. She started a one-person crusade to have CJ moved to a sanctuary. The other player in this saga is a well-established nonprofit that advocates for chimpanzees' rights. The nonprofit named Chimp Nation believes that chimpanzees should deserve special protection under the law. That special protection is they should have at least 1,000 square feet to live in and should be given something to do, some intellectual stimulation, while they're in captivity. Those are some of the kinds of things we're talking about, of course, this weekend. But there's another group. There's another group that's also interested in CJ. The other group is named Constitutional Amendment Coalition. They're striving to pass state constitutional amendments to give animals the status of people. After all, if Amazon is considered a person, why can't a chimpanzee be considered a person? All right, so far, Billy's not broken any laws of professional responsibility or rules, except for maybe calling Petunia a service dog. But besides that, she's in pretty good shape. But all that's about to change. So Billy hears about a rally that 16-year-old Molly Mayberry is putting on for CJ the chimp. After a rousing speech by Molly, around 50 people march over to City Hall. This includes Billy beating her drum, Petunia shaking a tambourine that's been strapped onto her backside, and the group delivers a stack of petitions to City Council saying that no animal like CJ should be kept inside the city limits. So really local activism here. Okay, now this is something you should pay attention to. After the march, Billy goes up to Molly. Remember, Molly is our young advocate. And Molly's father, Randall, and says, "Hi, I'm an animal rights lawyer. You might be able to raise more money for your efforts if you were a 501c3 nonprofit. Give me a call if you ever want to talk this through." Anybody see an issue there? Billy then gives Molly and Molly's father, Randall, a card. The card's, of course, got a picture of Petunia, Billy's cell number, and an email address with their slogan, "Life is short, drink more ale." Randall then asks, so Randall is the father, "I've always wondered, what's the difference between a 501c3 nonprofit and a 501c4? Billy thought a minute and then said, "Well, don't worry about the details on that. You'd be better off as a 501c3. Now listen up. Actually, Billy, as a beer lawyer, did not even know there was such a thing as a 501c4 nonprofit. Now, Billy wants to know just how bad is the situation out on Highway 101 where CJ is living. So Billy goes over to Mitch McElvoy's house, that's where CJ lives, to see the living conditions. From the street, Billy is able to see into the backyard. Billy sees CJ the chimp sitting in a small cage. As reported, there's nothing for CJ to do all day. CJ the chimp cries out to Billy, and Billy feels like CJ is saying, "Help me." Billy takes a few photos on our new iPhone 11, which, by the way, features a stunning Pro display and A13 Bionic cutting-edge Pro camera system. But then McElvoy, he's the person that owns the house that also owns CJ, comes out to confront Billy. "What are you doing taking pictures of my backyard without my permission?" he yells. Billy snaps back. "I just want to see for myself how bad the conditions are for CJ the chimp." McElvoy shouts out, "CJ is private property." Of course, that's what we've been talking about all weekend. "CJ is private property, my private property. Now get out of here and mind your own business. Just who the hell do you think you are anyway?" Well, Billy shouts back. She's not shy about anything. "I'm an animal rights lawyer, Billy Miller, that's who. Listen, things are going to get really rough for you if you don't find a sanctuary for CJ to move to. In fact," so this, pay attention, "in fact, I understand your wife Margaret left you and took your daughter Elizabeth to go work in an organic kale farm in Hawaii. Now, how are they going to feel when I blast this all over the internet about how you've wrecked their household?" All right, anybody see any issues? There are at least 3 major ones. The next segment that we'll do after this one has a lot more content, but this gets us into the feel. So what you're going to do is break into groups like your table size. We'll come back, 5-7 minutes, and then we'll talk about rules of professional responsibility that you think might be problematic, and we will talk about those. So break into groups, talk about things that you might see. There's not hundreds, it's not a law review or article, and it's not an exam. Tell me the big things you see. All right, talk amongst yourselves. So let's circle back around because we've got a lot more excitement coming up. So what I'm going to try to do is solicit comments, and I know there's mics up here, and so that I don't think is going to work. So if you shout out just a general comment about something you see, we'll pick up the discussion from there. So who sees something? Go ahead. Yeah, there's definitely a competence issue. So the rule, and you don't have to write these down. Of course, you can all go get your own set of rules. But competence rule 1.1 talks about, you have to have the competence to represent a client. And clearly Billy didn't have the competence, but let's talk about how can you get the competence. Could Billy, if she wanted to, have picked up a low level of expertise to be able to answer that nonprofit 501c3, 501(c)(4) question as a beer lawyer? Yes. Okay, what kinds of things would Billy need to do to be able to pick up that expertise? All right, so we'll start. So Billy could work with another lawyer that knows nonprofit law. What else could Billy do? Take a class, sure. Yeah, take nonprofit animal law, for example, that I teach. Yes. Well, what else? Yeah, boy, if you wanted to, you could get down into the really thick books and read 501c3, 501c4, plus mountains of tax documents behind that. So yes, so Billy can get up to speed if Billy chose to get up to speed, but Billy didn't choose to do anything. She did what I've seen time and time again, which is a lawyer volunteering for a nonprofit, giving legal advice off the top of their head because they wanted to seem knowledgeable and important to the animal welfare community, do things that they would never do to a paying client. Can you even imagine a paying client where somebody would ask you a question and you would just give an answer off the top of your head and not know the answer to? I mean, nobody would ever do that. But I see that all of the time in the nonprofit world. So the takeaway for the folks in the room is if you're asked a legal question and you don't know the answer, go look it up if you're going to answer it at all. All right, what else do we see besides the competence issue? We see anything else? Solicitation, good. So, I mean, the ambulance chasing rules that, we used to talk to of old, yes, you can't go out and solicit a client if you believe that they may need representation. I mean, and clearly that's what happened here. I mean, Billy was saying, look, I think you can do better, if you incorporate, and then there was a question that came from it, which brings up another issue, and it brings up a huge issue. Does Billy represent either of these two people? What do we think? I've got to know. All right, now's when I get to shock everybody and say, probably yes. Probably yes. So here's what the rules say and where the opinions are coming down. By opinions, I'm talking about people who are losing their ability to practice law, if not forever, at least for a short time. These rulings say that if somebody asks for legal advice and you give it, you are their lawyer. Now, does that scare anybody in the room? Raise your hand if you go, whoa, 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 whoa. I mean, we all think about the cocktail parties. We all think about Thanksgiving get-togethers. We all think about the time when you're asked that question about whatever you're asked. And of course, you lean back, you have another sip of the cocktail, and you give them an answer. Well, they're your client now. Did you run a conflicts check? But what's really scary about this when you do it is what you probably have not done is really sat down and interviewed them well enough to understand their situation. You don't know the context of the question you're being asked, and so you're probably giving very, very poor advice, assuming that you're competent to give advice on that topic at all. And so realize that if somebody's asking you a question, you've got one of two choices. Either you're ready to give them advice and accept them as a client on the spot, or you don't answer the question. Or the third one is, here's my card, set an appointment, here's my hourly fee, we'll set it up and we'll see if they call you back. So yes, we have to be very careful. It's one of the things I see getting lawyers into trouble as much as anything else is not realizing that when you give legal advice, you are picking up a client. And of course, what other things come up besides conflicts? What other things do you need to do for clients? One other thing you have to do for a client. Written agreements isn't required, but certainly is a best practice. I mean, you should nail down all of the aspects of a attorney-client relationship. And you probably haven't done that when somebody asks you about their pending divorce that their spouse doesn't know is coming yet. So good. Do we see anything else? We've got solicitation, competence. We've got, how about this piece about, I'm going to blast all over the internet that your spouse and child left you. Anyone see a problem with that? Problem? No problem. Problem. All right. Most people don't know the detail of this rule. There's actually a rule that says you can't embarrass a third party for your benefit in any kind of litigation. It's Rule 4.4. So it's one thing to be talking to an adversary. It's a whole different situation where you're involving a third party. And so this question is designed to involve that third party. So be very careful when you're talking, if I'll put it this way. When the friend of yours is trying to put some pressure on someone to do something, have them steer away from dealing with the third parties. All right, with that, we're going to roll on to a lot more. Okay, Billy, remember Billy is a lawyer. Billy is all worked up about CJ the chimp. Billy attends a meeting of the Constitutional Amendment Coalition. This is a group that wants to pass a state constitutional amendment to give animals the same status as people. The meeting starts with an explanation of why animals should have the status of people, how corporations are people under state law, and how animals like CJ the chimp need to be people to bring suits to defend themselves. The group's executive director, Larry Lamore, sees Billy in the crowd and says, "Our next step is to try and put out a constitutional amendment on the ballot in the next election. We want animals to have the same legal status as people. We have a rough draft of the amendment, but none of us are lawyers. Billy, I know you are an animal rights lawyer. Could you take a look at what we have drafted and give us your opinion on whether the amendment is legal?" So this is taking place in just a big old public meeting, and the executive director asks Billy, can you take a look at this? Billy stands up, takes a quick bow, and says to the group, "It would be an honor to help you out." Billy's dog, Petunia, remember Petunia, barks in agreement that yes, Billy should help out. When Billy gets home, and after playing with Petunia, of course, Billy hops on the internet. Billy cruises over to the listserv of Chimp Nation. So Chimp Nation is the other group. Goes over to the listserv of Chimp Nation to post what she saw at CJ the chimp's house. Billy writes, "It's horrible over there. Someone as smart as CJ the chimp sitting in a small cage with nothing to do. It's downright criminal." So that should ring some bells. Billy posts a picture of CJ the chimp on the Chimp Nation site. The response came flowing in when the group figured out that Billy is a lawyer. The executive director, so this is somebody at the top of the organization, the executive director of Chimp Nation posted, "Billy, glad to see you posting on the group page. What can we do to legally help this tortured chimp named CJ?" Billy wrote back to the entire group, not to the executive director, but to everybody on the listserv. "We could pass a state law that gives special rights to chimpanzees. I'm working with another group," I'll repeat that. "I'm working with another group who wants a state law constitutional amendment that would give animals the same status as people. But that approach may have a hard time passing." The executive director of Chimp Nation posts, "Billy, could you draft a local ordinance you're thinking about? Maybe each chimp held captive could have the right to live in at least 1,000 square feet. The chimps could also have the right to intellectual stimulation. I'm sure some of the people watching these posts could send you $100 each, maybe via PayPal, to cover some of your time. Come on, Chimp Nation, send some love over to our new lawyer friend, Billy Miller." Billy writes back to everybody, has no clue even how many people there are, writes back, "I'll get right on it. Feel free to send any donations you like to Billy at billymillerlaw.com. Billy then decides to really get involved. Billy is a regular contributor to the governor's reelection campaign. This isn't heading anywhere good. This helps get Billy access to the governor's staff. That should really scare you. And when Billy needs to lobby for brewery clients, she's got an in. Billy always says, "A little money and a lot of beer helps lubricate that political system." Billy goes to see Roxanne Booker, the chief aide to the governor. Of course, Petunia is with Billy, and when they drive over to the State House, Roxanne sees Billy in the doorway with a case of Silly Millie beer on Billy's shoulder and Petunia on a long leash. Good to see you, Billy, says Roxanne. Again, this is the assistant. Is that beer for me? Or is Petunia throwing a fundraising party at the governor's mansion tonight? Roxanne, this beer is for you, for your hard work as a public servant. But I can use your advice on something, Roxanne. Have you ever heard about that chimp named CJ over on Highway 101 that's kept in a small cage in the backyard? She answers, yeah, I have, Billy. Boy, you know, Molly, that high school kid beating the drum to help that chimp is an inspiration to all of us. Billy continues, you know, the prosecutor and animal control do nothing to help animals like CJ the chimp. The county won't get involved unless somebody's out there beating an animal with a pipe these days. We need to give these animals more rights to save them from this kind of abuse. Billy then said, I hear two ideas being kicked around. So this is important. I hear two ideas being kicked around. One is a constitutional amendment that gives all animals the same rights as people. Kind of like, you know, corporations are people. Now it would be animals are people too. The second is to single out chimpanzees in particular and give them the right to live in 1,000 square feet of space and also the right to have intellectual stimulation where they live. Roxanne asked, now this is the assistant to the governor, what are you saying, Billy, that we give all animals, including, let's say, Petunia, the status of people? Nobody but you are ready for Petunia to have the right to vote. Okay, says Billy. I'm not sure Petunia would even join the right political party anyway. But then Roxanne continued, the state's constitutional amendment is never going to happen, Billy. That's just too weird in our political landscape. We can't get the Equal Rights Amendment passed. How are we going to pass something like that? But you know, that second idea might fly. More space for smart animals that kind of look like us? Well, okay. You'd have to be a real creep to be against that. I'll give the governor a heads up that this issue might start getting some traction. And of course, on behalf of the governor, thanks for the beer. So then Billy goes back home wondering how to report back on all of this. Billy decided on a Facebook posting that went like this. To all my animal friends, went to the governor's office today, had a great meeting with the staff regarding how to help CJ the chimp. The governor's office is following our young advocate friend Molly Mayberry. The governor's office is a big fan. You know, we might get some traction on a state law giving chimps the right to have a decent sized space to live in and have something to do. But things look grim for those of us wanting animals to have the same legal status as people. Billy was not ready for the response that she got from this. The posting was reposted over 100 times, and it wasn't positive. Billy was slammed from all sides. The animal rights activists wanting a personhood constitutional amendment at a state level were the loudest. Who do you think you are going to the governor on our behalf? The animal welfare advocates were also angry. What? Chimps get a cage the size of a condo and pigs still live in gestation crates? You don't speak for us, Billy Miller. And besides, who are you anyway? All right, anybody see any possible ethics violations? Go ahead and break amongst yourselves, make a few notes, and then we'll come back in a little bit. All right, let's circle back around. What do we see? We good? We're not good, are we? All right, what do we see? Holler out a few words that'll get us started. Conflict, yes, all right. Before we get to the conflict question, and of course that's the root of this whole section, I've already decided for you that Molly is also a client. Remember, the person or Molly's father, not really sure which one. Billy represents them. How about the other two entities, Chimp Nation and the Constitutional Amendment Coalition? Are they clients? If we use the definition, if you ask for legal advice and you give it, are we clients? I think we're clients here because they've asked to do work, and Billy said they're going to do it, and so we've got a client. Now, do we have a conflict? So who here says, yeah, we got a conflict? Of course we got a conflict. And this is one of the most important aspects of this entire 1 hour, because I see this over and over again. I call it the case of the shifting client. Now, I've never seen that in print anywhere. I mean, it's just what I call it. As an animal advocate and as a lawyer, there's a problem. You know, there's CJ the chimp. There's the elephant that's in captivity in too small a space. There's whatever there is. Community comes together to try to fix the problem. You, or your friends, as a lawyer advocate, want to help fix the problem. So you work with one group, you work with another group, whichever group seems to be getting the most traction, you spend time working with, and then they fall off. You know, their approach doesn't work, or they get disgusted and they move on, or they're just not very active in it, and then the lawyer advocate moves to the next group to help, and the next group to help. It is a disaster for us. So the biggest thing that I want you to remember, besides you start giving advice and you've picked up clients, is watch for this issue of the case of the shifting client. Because at this stage, Billy represents 3 different organizations / people, and they all 3 have pretty radical different views on how to attack this problem. Now, has anybody ever seen that before, where there's 2 animal welfare groups that don't see eye to eye on how to fix a problem? Yes, of course, we should all be laughing. We've all seen this over and over again. I mean, you can have 2 groups that want to help birds, and they can't agree on how to help birds. I mean, we see this over and over and over again, and that creates a conflict. So, how do we avoid, best practice, how do we avoid getting into this mess if we're a lawyer advocate? I'm sorry? One client. That's the easiest way. Find a group that you're aligned with in terms of the philosophical way that you approach all of this. Find a group that deals with the species that you're most passionate about and really align with them. I mean, don't make any bones. Yes, I'll do pro bono work for you. Yes, I consider you my client. Yes, I want you to consider me your lawyer, even though I'm doing this on a volunteer work. One client, that works. If we can't quite bring ourselves to that, what's the other approach? Yes. Yeah, you can get a waiver. What's the likelihood you're going to get a waiver in these situations? Very low. And so the other approach is don't represent anybody. Hi, I'm Russ Mead. I'm an animal rights lawyer. No, I don't represent anybody. And I'm not giving any legal advice. But I'm going to jump in and I'm going to help out in lots of other ways. But no, you're not getting any legal advice out of me. You know, you need help, painting the barn. I'm with you. You want help doing office work. I mean, there's lots of ways that you can help in an intellectual way that helps an organization that doesn't involve you giving legal advice. That's the other approach. Truly be a free agent, but you really have to be careful because it's so tempting when that executive director comes up and asks you about, was it okay the way they terminated this rotten employee? And you give an answer because now you represent them. So if you can really do it, a way to really do it is to not represent anybody. But you got to be really careful, and so many folks just don't have that willpower. They got to give that answer that they know that they can answer. All right, so there's 2 ways. What else did we see? We got a conflict of interest. Taking the money via PayPal. This is the first time I've put this into one of these scenarios because it's starting to show. I mean, people are doing GoFundMe and do PayPal accounts for impact litigation for these kinds of cases. So we're starting to see something from the ABA on how to handle these things. Generally, when you receive money from somebody other than the client, you're allowed to do it, but you need to have a special arrangement with whoever both gave you the money and whoever you're representing. First of all, the client's got to say it's okay. And in this case, it seemed like, the client said it was okay. But it's not clear at all what the expectations are of the donors and how they consider the relationship with Billy. So Billy needs to have an agreement with everybody that says, this is the deal. I don't represent you, I represent the organization. Yes, you're gonna help fund this. No, you don't have any say in the way the money is spent. If there's extra money, it goes here. There needs to be a literal fee arrangement with everybody who donates money. And if you jump through all of those hoops, I'm thinking the trend is you're gonna be okay. But that's a whole lot different than say, send me some money via PayPal and then that'll help defray the costs of litigation. Because what happens if somebody comes up to you and demands that you do something a different way than you want to, and they say, well, I've paid. Boy, now you've got an ethics complaint, bar complaint, you got a big mess on your hands. So again, the purpose of this is if you see something, it should set off a bell. You should go look at it. If you start thinking about accepting donations to do impact litigation, you're going to need to spend some time on it. What's the other big thing that we've got going here? We got confidentiality, and confidentiality is a super hot issue right now, and here's the way it works. People don't realize this, but the confidentiality rules have always said something along the lines, and I brought the big book to look it up afterwards if somebody wants me to really show them. It says this: you have to keep the information you learn about your client confidential. That's the end of the sentence. It doesn't say you have to keep confidential information confidential. So think of how many times you have learned something about a client, you think that it's general knowledge, and so you're talking about it because, well, yeah, I mean, we all talk about it because we saw it in the newspaper. So you're talking to your lawyer buddies, you're talking about it in the CLE, you're talking about it, but you're talking about a client. It's not information that is confidential, but it is information about your client. The ABA rule says that's a straight-up violation. And that shocks lawyers when I tell it to them. In fact, a lot of lawyers won't believe it and make me pull the book out and have them read it to them, but that's what it says. There's only one exception that will get you out. I mean, there's a couple of exceptions, like somebody's going to die or, along those lines. But the exception is that if you get a waiver, you're okay with this, or if there's no way anybody could ever figure out what client you're talking about, you can do it. So law professors, CLE folks, if you never identify the client, nobody would ever figure out who the client is, you're okay. But the situations where you're at the bar association and you're talking about a case and everybody knows that you're the lawyer on it, you need a waiver. So let me give you a best practice, because that's one of these things going, well, I see this violated every week, and so Here's the thing to remember. In your engagement contracts, think about putting in a line that talks about confidentiality and when you're allowed to talk about their case. There are ways you can do this. You can say that you're talking about the public aspects of the case or information that's generally known about the case, or figure out a way to craft it. But the straight up rule is you can't talk about it. And that's a rule that people typically don't understand, and it's one that at least the ABA is doubling down on. They're starting to write a lot about this issue, reminding people that that's what the rule of professional responsibility is. Yes? Yeah, so the question is, can it be discussed with the firm itself? Now, what the ABA in their comments when they write about this says, there's an implied agreement with the client, even without a written agreement, that says you can discuss the case with anybody who you would normally discuss the case with to carry out your representation. So you can always talk to the people in your firm. If you need to, let's say, hire a research person, and that's something that you normally do, you can do those types of things if you're, again, carrying out the representation. Of course, this also means talking to tribunals, talking to judges, talking to whoever else you need to talk to. So that's already implied, and the ABA recognizes that. So think about this as a best practice. Think about rewriting or researching this and then changing your engagement contract. All right, we're going to roll on. Oh, last one. Beer? Good, bad, not good? Not good. I'm getting into this. Yeah, it's not good. So there's some ethics rulings on this, and they basically go like this. It says you can give officials, that includes judges, it includes elected officials, courtesy kinds of gifts that would be the kind that you would normally give somebody. So if you're friends with a judge and the judge is having, let's say a baby shower, everybody shows up with a gift, you can give the baby gift. What you can't do is be giving things of value like cases of beer. This would clearly be outside of the realm of what's acceptable. So small gifts that are just normal courtesies that you would give to any friend you can do, but past that you can't. So I put that in there, for that reason. There's also no real clear path on who that beer was given to. Anybody that thinks that beer made it to the governor's, mansion is, I think, kidding themselves. And she says all along that she likes to grease the skids, so to speak. Which brings up another thing. Of course, you can't do anything that's illegal, and in that state, that may or may not be illegal too. Comment or question? Yeah. Yeah. Right. Yeah. Hmm. Well, and that's why I'm here to scare the hell out of you. I mean, yeah, I hope I'm doing that, because when you look at the opinions, I mean, you're in the box that gets you a hearing in front of the disciplinary council. So that is exactly why I'm up here doing this, and we take the time in the animal law conventions, is because animal lawyers or the people in this room who are also advocates often think that, oh, I ought to be giving my legal advice to anybody that can use it that will help advance the cause. It's almost, and this is a huge concept, it's almost as if we view the cause as our client. The cause is not our client. Nowhere in the rules of professional responsibility does it recognize a cause as a client. Our client is a person, a corporation. The client is the client. And so, yes, we're in trouble all the time. And that's why this CLE keeps showing up year after year after year, because there's this general concept that, oh, as long as we're trying to do good for the animals, we're okay. I will also say that I know people who, weren't able to practice law for a while because, they crossed these lines. I mean, lawyers do end up with disciplinary actions for these exact issues, in particular the conflict ones. So this isn't hypothetical stuff. This is real stuff that can cost you your ability to practice law. So I'm trying to get you to think about that. I'm not saying you have to paint the barn, but sure don't be their lawyer. Sure don't be their lawyer, or be their lawyer. I've been lawyer of some pretty big animal nonprofits, and when I was their lawyer, I was their lawyer. There was no mistaking it. So go that route. Go one of the two routes. This middle thing is why we're here. All right, we're going to go into the, how much time? We're going into the last section here. Okay, Billy Miller was bummed out with the negative response to all of Billy's fine advocacy work. The only thing that cheered Billy up was the weekend Oktoberfest. All of the local breweries put up beer tents just outside of town at the lake. There was a tent city for people like Billy who wanted to camp out for the weekend and not worry about driving home. Music played nonstop. Vegan food was in ample supply. Billy wanted to do something to redeem their status in the animal rights community. Billy went to the booth of Chimp Nation to see if Billy could help out. The answer was yes. The small group had a grill to grill vegan Impossible burgers as a fundraiser, but they forgot to buy the hamburger buns. The executive director handed Billy a $50 bill and asked Billy to go to the Safeway and pick up some buns. Billy put the money in her wallet, loaded Petunia in the car, and headed out. While at Safeway, Billy bought a stack of poster boards and a few markers. Billy posted signs around the park inviting everyone interested to come to a drum circle in support of CJ the Chimp. Just come by Billy's campsite, so said the sign. The drum circle was a smash hit. Dogs were welcome, and Petunia was having a great time meeting new dog friends along with one pet pig named Big Sam. At the start of the drum circle, Billy said a few inspirational words about how the fight for animal rights is long, but worth every ounce of effort. After the drumming, most of the people had set up lawn chairs and even chaise lounge to listen to the music. The topic of taking direct action to help the animals came up. One member of the Constitutional Amendment Coalition told the group that they should just go in and take CJ the Chimp in the middle of the night. Then in underground railroad fashion, we could move CJ the Chimp to a sanctuary. Billy chimed in. Be careful. As of today, CJ is still property, and taking CJ would be theft. Molly Mayberry, the 16-year-old activist, and their father, Randall, came by and sat down. Billy apologized to Molly for taking the liberty to talk to the governor's staff about Molly. The apology was sincere, and Molly was no longer angry at Billy. Billy left to spend the night with some friends, and Molly's dad, Randall, stayed behind. before long, Randall and Billy were alone in the campsite talking about how great Millie was and listening to the music in the background. They drank Petunia Ale, a hoppy, fun IPA made by one of Billy's clients. Well, one growler led to another, and before long, Billy and Randall were in Billy's tent for the night. But don't worry, Billy and Randall were responsible. They made sure Petunia had a comfy dog bed in the corner of the tent. All right, what do we see with that? That's our last section before we wind up and let you know how it all happened. Go ahead, talk amongst yourselves for a few minutes. Do I have any time? So what's one thing that just jumps out at you? She stole her money. Yes, we call it commingling of funds, but okay, she stole her money. So when you're taking money from a client, it has to be safeguarded. It has to be segregated, kept in separate accounts. I will give you a best practice that actually works really well because I've seen this happen over and over again. We're trusted as lawyers. Our clients often ask us to go do things like that. We're glad to help when we go do it. Do this. Never take the cash. The way to do this is take your own debit or credit card, go buy whatever they want you to buy, hand them the receipt, and get reimbursed. If you just follow that simple technique, you'll never have trouble when this situation comes up. So refuse the cash, take care of it, get reimbursed, and now you're not commingling funds. All right, what else do we see? Adopt that. That's a great best practice. What else do we see? Nobody sees anything else? How about Randall? We all good with Randall or not good with Randall? Not good with Randall. All right, so Randall was maybe the client, maybe the client's father, and it was pretty clear by the implication that they had a sexual relationship that night. I'll just say it, they did. And so is that against the rules of professional responsibility? Well, here's what the rule says, which surprises a lot of people. It's you can't have a sexual relationship with somebody unless you had that relationship with them before you started to represent them. So I was teaching this in a law school setting once, and one of the students raised their hand and says, okay, so here's what you do. And she was serious. She says, as soon as you go volunteer for a new place, you find all the hot people, you have sex with them before you ever answer a legal question, and you're good to go. And I said, well, I'm not really sure that's what they're talking about here. And by the way, I've given this presentation in Louisiana. In Louisiana, they don't have this rule, which I always got a kick out of. And they said, well, we're just more responsible than that. It's like, okay. So in Louisiana, they're more responsible than this. All right, so those are the big things in that. So anybody interested in how it all turns out? All right, here's how it turns out. But before I do, so I am a Sumi painter as part of my outreach advocacy. I've painted about 40 pictures of a chimp here. First 40 or so people that come down to the stage will get one of these. So they're not prints. I hand painted each one of these. But here's how it ended up. CJ the chimp took matters into their own hands and escaped from the small cage. Chimp, yeah, round of applause for CJ. Yeah. Chimp Nation sprung into action and found CJ hiding behind a Safeway dumpster. CJ the chimp was whisked off to a chimpanzee sanctuary where CJ is making lots of chimpanzee friends. Molly, the young activist, did form a 501c with Billy's help. Molly now organizes animal rights marches across the globe from a dorm room at Lewis and Clark College. And Petunia, our friend Petunia, is traveling around the world with Billy and Randall as they work as the advance team for Molly's animal rights rallies. So with that, thank you very much. And I will turn the panel over.
Hey. Excellent. I'm dropping all the electronic devices.
There we go.
All right. Yes, it came up on the screen. We're already off to a great start. So we're transitioning from talking about ethics and ethics ELEs, talking about compassion fatigue. And before we do that, though, we should probably tell them who we are. So I'm David Rosengard. I'm a senior staff attorney with the Animal Legal Defense Fund's Criminal Justice Program. But once upon a time before that, I worked at Lewis and Clark undergrad in student life, doing, among other things, a lot of work on community justice and self-care, sort of peer counseling work, and that is where I got to know you.
Yes, my name is Michelle Kirton, and I work on the at the Lewis and Clark College campus, and I work for all three schools: the law school, the grad school, and the undergraduate college. I function as a licensed psychologist, and I happen to be the associate director of our counseling service, and I also run a training program for graduate students who are eventually going to become psychologists, so they work at the center where I work.
Excellent. And we will dive right into this. And it is, in fact, happening, yes. So why are we doing this session? Well, ultimately, of course, this is all about self-care, but I'm going to answer this specifically in a few ways for attorneys in the room and for non-attorneys in the room. So for attorneys, if you're not buying into the notion of self-care as being about compassion for yourself, which is important, because one of the things that I suspect for many of us motivates us to be here at an animal law conference is a larger sense of compassion and justice. And I would encourage you to have that sense of compassion and justice for yourself. But if you are not buying that, A, you're getting CLE credit for it. And if you haven't, you should sign in for that in the back room. That's going to be useful for you, yay CLE credits. But also we know empirically that the legal profession struggles with these kinds of issues. We know that the legal profession has a disproportionately high incidence of what we might generously call unhealthy coping mechanisms, whether that is substance use or otherwise, and that attorneys tend to struggle with some of the issues implicated here. But this isn't just for attorneys, and that's one of the things that I'm really excited about with this session, because what we're going to be talking about impacts not only attorneys, but anyone who works in this sort of area. And so one of the things that we're looking at in terms of why this is at this conference for attorneys and non-attorneys is that being aware of compassion fatigue and being able to exercise self-care really will make you a more effective advocate. Being able to withstand the corrosive impact of exposure to sort of secondary trauma will in fact enable you to be better at taking care of yourself and therefore better able at taking care of the animals and others that you work with. So what is compassion fatigue? And I'll note here that, due deference to the piece that Russ just gave you, I don't have a background in psychology, so I'm not giving you a medical description, but for our working practice, it's good to know that what we generally refer to as compassion fatigue is the cumulative impact of repetitive or continuous exposure to trauma while you're doing helping work. And this impacts a wide variety of professions, everything from doctors to attorneys, to anyone who is trying to help and is exposed directly or indirectly to trauma. And on that note, it's worth underscoring the notion of vicarious trauma. We have a tendency, when we think about traumatic events, to limit those to directly experienced traumas that are happening in real time to you or physically in front of you. And it's important to realize there is more to trauma than that. Vicarious trauma is trauma that one experiences by virtue of hearing it described, reading about it, seeing records of it, all of the things that as attorneys we are encountering continually when we deal with these kinds of cases. And there are a variety of reasons why that sort of vicarious secondary trauma impacts us. I can give you the sort of emotional-based idea that it has to do with our compassion. I can give you the lawyer idea that it's about how we analyze situations and that we need to be able to emphasize with those to really internalize them and work with them. I could give you the biological notion that it's about mirror neurons and the fact that our brains actually respond to seeing things happen to others. For our purposes, again, the exact details matter less than the fact that it does occur and that it does impact us. And the symptoms of compassion fatigue through either direct or secondary trauma are wide-ranging. They involve increasing senses of exhaustion, a decreased ability to empathize with people, a sort of retreat within oneself, sleep issues, anxiety, intrusive thoughts, feeling of futility, an ongoing litany. And again here, it's less important that we be able to reach as practitioners of law, a particular mental health diagnosis. It's more important that we be able to note that there's something going on with us, and we want to seek effective assistance and help. And so with that, I'm going to turn things over to you.
Okay. Yeah. So as a psychologist, oftentimes I see clients, it's sort of like after they've realized that something is going on with them and they are in deep water, and sometimes that goes all the way to where they're considering they're taking their own lives. And so oftentimes what I really want to do with them is really help people catch things earlier on in terms of recognizing that there's something happening in terms of they're not themselves. Because you do want to practice effectively, but you also want to live healthily so that you can, just move along with your life. One of the things I do when I meet clients is I try to eventually, after I get an informed consent, get my contract and all of that together, I do help them to assess what's going on in their life. And I do that by sometimes asking them a number of questions to help them gauge where they are now and maybe compare that to other times in their lives when they were feeling better. So what I did is I came up with just 3 questions that I'm going to have you just take a few moments to answer for today. And then I believe in your packet there's actually a series of questions that can be helpful to you, because what is really good is for you to actually gauge and think about, how would I answer this and how do I become more aware and more alert if something's going on with me. So if you have a few moments, can you take a few moments and answer these 3 questions? What are the top 3 signs or signals that I'm emotionally exhausted due to what is demanded of me professionally? In other words, what would other people notice of me, and what would you notice of yourself? What would I notice of myself? So take a minute and just think about that. Top 3 signs. About blank % of the time, I feel that the work I do for my animals makes a difference in the world. And then another just basic question is, I have trouble feeling a good work-life balance, because we do, for many of us, have a life outside of work. I have trouble feeling that balance. What % of the time, if you looked over the past year?
There we go,
Yeah, there we go to some of the questions. So if, just in the interest of time, of course we don't have time for people to answer all these questions now, but I thought I would read for you a few other questions that could be very important for you to reflect on, and then to think about, and then to also think about what you could do about your responses if you're not pleased with your responses. So I know when I'm feeling dissatisfied with my job or work roles, because I tend to blank when I feel this way. Here's what my friends and family members observe of me when I feel overwhelmed and powerless at work. Because sometimes what happens is we get feedback from other people and we lose our perspective, but we don't know it until we get that feedback. My beliefs about the world and about people has shifted since I began my line of work. So maybe in the past, I used to believe what? But now I believe something different maybe. You can ask what % of the time you feel good about the work you do for your animals. A basic yes/no question could be that I feel that the colleagues I have actually value the work I do for animals. It turns out that sometimes we're actually surrounded by colleagues that aren't very, let's say, supportive of what we're doing, and we're working very, very hard and very long hours, but people might not appreciate it. to get at some coping strategies. So these questions are not on the PowerPoint, but you do have them for you available after the conference. When exhausted and emotionally burned out, I turn to who for support and to help me to relax? Do you have someone to turn to? It is easy for me to set limits with my work. Here's my typical strategies. For some of you, it'll be very easy to answer that. For others of you, you might be stumped, and if you're stumped, I would say really think about it because you want to have, answers, responses. In the distant past, when I needed to feel emotionally rejuvenated and restored, I did what? But nowadays, when I need to feel emotionally rejuvenated and restored, I do what? I have ideas of how my work site can support me to take better care of myself. For instance, my organization can do, and then you fill in the blank. After encountering difficult material, I can debrief with the following colleagues or legal peers. For some of you, that's a very quick response. You know who you can turn to for support. For some of you, it might be that you have very few people to turn to for support. So generally, the beginning part of many counseling appointments is just to get people to take a pause, to take a breath, think about what they're doing and how they're feeling, and then to actually notice what signs or what lets them know that they're not doing well, and then we hone in on how to help them just recalibrate and rejuvenate themselves. So I'm going to turn it over to David for another segment.
Excellent. And that segues really well into this next piece, which is looking at why this sort of issue could be particularly relevant to lawyers, but also animal lawyers. And part of why that segues so well is there are a variety of reasons why lawyers are traditionally really bad at doing that sort of self-assessment work, and why we should be working through these sort of questions and introspection to help us do better at that. So let's take a look first at some of the general issues non-unique to the animal law portion. Of course, we've talked about vicarious trauma and how this applies to a variety of lawyers. It's also worth noting that the points at which attorneys become involved in other people's lives, attorney intervention points, are not typically the happiest moments of people's lives. People and animals, the clients that we work with, tend to come to us when things are going bad. And so particularly for those of us who are striving to make things better for individuals and for animals writ large, or other categories of clients writ large, it can be difficult to see people, animals, systems at their worst, at their darkest, at their most dysfunctional. And we don't always see things after they get better. So that may mean that attorneys are working with clients when clients are in crisis, but the client doesn't necessarily return to that attorney when things are getting better. And the attorney doesn't necessarily see the upside of people coming out the other side. There's also what I like to refer to as the lawyer's mask. This notion that within the law, we have an internal pressure to present as part of our professional package as very non-emotional. And there are a variety of reasons for this. It goes all the way back to, how many of you are 1Ls? Yeah, are you having a blast getting cold called? Sweet. So it actually has to do with the way that learning system, that educational system operates. One of the things that we do when we cold call people and encourage them to dissect cases in an emotionally dispassionate fashion is we are training attorneys as professionals to believe that our appropriate response is to not display emotion about cases. And I would argue that this may be problematic in terms of long-term coping strategies, because emotions are part of our existence and makeup as creatures, and ignoring that and denying it makes it harder to do the sort of self-assessment work that Michelle was talking about. So there's a pressure within the legal profession to not acknowledge the emotional impact of what we're doing, and to compartmentalize that in a way that is not necessarily healthy. There's good compartmentalization, there's unhealthy compartmentalization, and we can too often fall into the latter. And also within the legal system itself, the work we do is ultimately incremental. We exist in a common law-based system where we move things forward a little bit at a time, and that's how the system is meant to operate. This doesn't necessarily give each of us as individual actors clarity of finding and identifying the moment of heroic change that the narrative around lawyers may have conditioned us to believe is out there. There's a mythology around the law, that there's going to be the one big case that breaks everything right open. Yeah, that was the right response. Because the secret is, every one big case that you read in law school, and again, this comes back to in some ways the way we study law, every one big case was preceded by innumerable prior cases, some of which failed for strategic reasons that moved the law forward, some of which failed for reasons that had nothing to do with strategy. It's difficult in the moment for us necessarily to see the change that we are involved in making. And so when we're working to make change as attorneys, that can be difficult. It can be corrosive. And in terms of animal law specifically, that's heightened by the fact that we're working outside a dominant paradigm. We're working to change not only the law, but working to change the law and the way society interacts with and sees animals. So there's a higher metaphorical hill to climb, but also in terms of finding colleagues to discuss with, to bounce ideas off of, that can be difficult when the work we're doing may be to some degree alien to the paradigm of our colleagues. If you're an attorney working on factory farming issues, you may not find the environment you're looking for to discuss that with your colleagues when your colleagues are eating your clients. You may need to find a way to operate around or between that. There's also issues that arise within movement lawyering. Because again, we are, regardless of where we are within the animal law movement, regardless of what our particular goals are, we are operating in a larger movement to change the law. And that, in some ways, is great. It means that we can have individuals who support us. But it also means that there are, as you've probably discerned, internal fractures around doctrinal differences within the movement. And this can make it hard to feel supported. When you're feeling like, surely we're all here for the same goal, but because of a difference of opinion about precedent or strategy, you may not be fully supported, or you may not feel comfortable discussing things with your intellectual and ideological colleagues. There could also be fracture points between legal and non-legal actors within that movement. It's sometimes difficult for non-legal individuals to fully appreciate that slow and incremental change. They want to know why things are not happening faster, or they want to know things that you cannot tell them for the sort of ethic rules that Russ went over. And that sort of client confidentiality can make it difficult to get the support you're looking for. In a similar way, there can be, and some of you may have experienced this, a sense of pressure that comes from feeling like you need to always be representing for animal law at all times. You are the animal lawyer, and if you're not always on point, you're somehow letting down the animals. That's an incredible amount of pressure, and perhaps not the healthiest paradigm to carry with you. I would encourage you, and I think Michelle will talk more about strategies to deal with compassion fatigue, but I would encourage you not to feel like you always are responsible for all the things, because that's not realistic for anyone. Similarly, there are strategies that are deployed within the movement that may be very useful for particular attorneys or problematic for particular attorneys. So let's take, for example, witness culture, and the notion that one of the things we can do to honor the suffering of animals is bear witness to that, to not avert our eyes from the suffering. There are some individuals for whom that is incredibly inspiring. There are some individuals for whom that helps them realize systemic changes that need to be made or individual choices they want to make differently. There are other individuals for whom, once they've made those realizations, continuing to look at suffering is only causing them pain. And I'd encourage you to think about what works for you as an individual attorney, what works for you as an individual activist, and to make choices that enable you to better operate within this sphere. And finally, one of our difficulties is our clients aren't able to say thank you. And I think no matter how much we can look at animals such as this alpaca and think, this is an animal that's been helped. This is an animal who we've done good work for. There's a difference between us and our colleagues who do work with humans, because humans will give us feedback. They'll say thank you, or they'll say, this is what you could have done better. This is how you can be more effective. And we don't have that luxury. We have to try to figure that out on our own. We also have to try to reassure ourselves that we are doing the right thing. And again, that's part of the reason why it's important to have peers that we can turn to. And on that note, I wanted to thank two of my colleagues, Nicole Pilata and Priscilla Rader, for letting me bounce a lot of these ideas off them as we were developing this presentation, because I can't underscore this enough. None of us in this business are doing this alone. And speaking of not being alone, back to you.
Okay. So I'm going to take just a few moments to end by going over some strategies for coping and for prevention of compassion fatigue, because it can be debilitating. One of the things is basically to engage and to remind yourself of self-care and to engage in just the basics of it. Many of us actually skip this all the time because we're working all the time. It just seems like work never ends. So this means that you would have to prime yourself to think about balance and ask yourself how to have balance in your life in terms of making sure that you're getting food, you're getting exercise, you're getting water, you're getting sleep. Ask yourself how you relax and try and make sure you get some of that in every day. Ask yourself, okay, on my last vacation, did I actually work during that vacation, or did I actually vacation? It's important for you to unwind and just step away at times, and that comes in the basics of self-care. The other thing, David highlighted this very well, is to have team and peer support. Make sure that you have colleagues that you can turn to and talk to. Make sure that when you're going through a difficult case or a difficult time, that you share that with someone versus harbor that or hold that to yourself, because over time that actually is hurting and hurting and hurting, and you're carrying a lot of pain inside of you. And over time, it doesn't help you be your best, and you always want to be at your best. Another thing I would suggest is, it's hard for us to do this because we live in a technology-based world, but it is to actually part ways with technology sometimes and to turn off media when we can, only because it takes away from having a boundary. It's just like when technology happened, it just got harder to have boundaries with work. So somehow find a way to implement boundaries in your life, and sometimes it means turning off technology. It's just, I know it's hard to do, but I just thought I'd, add it out there. Another strategy is just to be aware of yourself. Many of us, we just go through life and we don't ever stop and just think for a minute. Who am I today? How do I compare that to who I was 10 years ago? What were my beliefs 10 years ago? What do I believe in today? So all of the self-assessment questions that I asked earlier, I would encourage you to, at some point, actually walk through those and actually think about what would highlight for you when you have a problem when it comes to feeling not at your best. So for some people, and then actually what brings people in to see a therapist or to just turn to someone sometimes, is that they actually end up with anxiety symptoms because they are witnessing a lot of harsh material at times. It means that they're sometimes having mini panic attacks, sometimes they're walking around with obsessive thoughts, or they're having a lot of difficulty sleeping, for instance. They're just ruminating about their work all of the time, and it makes it very hard for them to function. For some people, they'll notice changes in their body, meaning they'll have a lot of headaches, they'll have trouble either losing weight, gaining weight, they'll have trouble with pains in various parts of their body. For other people, it's their belief system is what changes over time, but it's not what they wanted for themselves. It just seemed like it just happened out of their control. So then I would say put a check on it in terms of where are you with your beliefs and how you're exercising your beliefs and your values. Another thing is to make sure you have outside hobbies and to engage in a life outside of work so that you're really striving for some kind of balance. Another thing is to try and maybe keep a journal or find some way to process or to identify that, yes, you're human, you have emotions, and although sometimes you're encouraged to push them to the side, you can take the time to go and explore them and work with them. So journaling is a great technique for that. The other thing I would encourage some people to do is to think about in your work setting what little adjustments you can make in your work setting that might be helpful to you. So a few things I came up with is sometimes it's very supported, let's say, that we take mental health days, meaning sick time that's actually about your mental health. For some of you, that might not be what's encouraged or what's endorsed, but just think, is that possible? For some work sites, they develop the work site in a way where you're encouraged to actually go on walks, to take breaks, to be with your colleagues and to debrief and to talk with them. At some places that's not encouraged just because the work culture has evolved to be a certain way. So my thing is bring it up. Maybe that would be helpful. If you think it might be helpful in your organization, talk about it. If there's space where you can create a relaxation room or have a massage chair or something that would actually help you to unwind, see if you can have that put into your workspace. Just bring up things that can change your organizational culture. And the last thing I would say is just remember that you can always seek professional assistance. I believe here in Oregon, the Oregon Attorney Assistance Program would be like a top resource for you. And then another one on a national level is you can look at the website for the American Bar Association Commission on Lawyer Assistant Programs, which can actually refer you to other assistance programs throughout the United States. And of course, consider therapy. I have to put in a plug for that as well. Okay.
No, and I would underscore that. Again, when we worked together at the undergraduate, I was always telling students, this is an incredible opportunity to take advantage of accessing services that will give you the space and a permission structure to really think about yourself and your mental health and who you are and where you want to be. And that's relatively rare, particularly in our modern world, and that's a whole separate conversation. But take advantage of those opportunities and know that as attorneys, while our profession is not great at this, our profession is aware that we aren't great at it. So there are resources available, and those resources are eager to be used, not only because ultimately as the attorneys, one of the reasons we exist is because we want to help deal with issues and solve issues, but because, again, to refer to the piece that Russ did, ultimately, if things get bad enough for you, compassion fatigue is going to impact your ability to adequately represent your clients. And then you've got an ethics issue. You've got a professional responsibility issue. So our professional organizations have services available to us, and we should be able to take advantage of those, and we should be looking out for each other. Remember, yes, we are all part of a larger movement within the law, but integral to that is us being part of that movement. And if you're not taking care of yourself, you're also not taking care of the movement. So with that, is that a 7? We have 7 minutes left.
Some questions.
Oh, we got done early. I think we could do some questions if people have some questions.
If not, we're done.
Yeah.
Will you take questions? Hi, I'm not an attorney, but I do volunteer in wildlife rehab and have been involved in some very large-scale animal seizure operations. And sometimes you can't get some of those things out of your head.
Yeah.
I mean, you simply can't. And I'm sure as attorneys, you see the same things. So Michelle, this is actually a question for you. Do you find, or have you ever recommended the type of therapy that you would actually use for someone with PTSD? Because it can get, for example, beta blocker therapy or that eye thing, which I don't really understand. Yeah, I'm just curious if you've recommended or used anything like that.
Yes, what you're talking about is someone who's being traumatized. right? And PTSD is about trauma, and EMD is often used with trauma work. So I would recommend, the thing is there's a variety of different types of therapies out in our field, and each person has to find the right thing for them because everyone just clicks with something different. But I would recommend seeing someone who specializes in post-traumatic stress disorder, is what you're thinking of, PTSD, or just working with people who've been through all sorts of trauma, because I think David mentioned this, you don't need to have a diagnosis to have concerns and issues. Like my thing is, don't get bogged down in diagnoses and
Just get help.
the technicalities of things. It's just that you need help, go and talk to someone.
Yeah, and I would underscore that. Much like we don't ask our clients to identify their legal problem and write a brief before they come see us, we don't need to identify our health issues and do a full diagnosis before we see a professional.
Just go.
All we need to do is have the space and the permission to say something doesn't feel right. I'm having difficulty operating as well as I should, feeling the way I should. I'm going to go seek assistance and put myself in the hands of someone who has that expertise.
Hi, my name is Caitlin. I'm a 1L at Loyola Law in New Orleans. There's been lots of surprises in these first 3 months at school, but my greatest confusion is that attorneys who think so critically about outside issues seem very unlikely to practice mindfulness. Personally, I've been practicing mindfulness and meditation, yoga for more than a decade. I could not be getting through school as I am now with low stress and joy were it not for these practices. In my other life, I'm a vegan chef and cheesemaker. The restaurant industry also suffers from high levels of substance abuse and long working hours. I do feel like there was a watershed moment, however, in the restaurant industry when Anthony Bourdain took his own life. It really opened up the discussion of mental health in that industry. Is the legal profession as a whole ready to talk about its mental health issues?
The legal profession is certainly getting there. Even in the relatively small amount of time I've been operating in the legal profession post-law school, and certainly during law school, I've seen a shift, and there is a larger societal shift within the law. So we're getting there, but I think we also have a lot of built-up obstacles to get through. And part of it is that we're dealing with a range of individuals who have a range of different individual needs. For some people, mindfulness is the answer. For other people, it's going to be something else. But also, we're dealing with a structure that sort of systemically on an ongoing basis counter-reinforces mindfulness as attorneys and self-care as attorneys. And so we are having those conversations. I'm not aware of a bar association in the country that isn't doing something about mental health work, but that doesn't mean that as attorneys we are all individually taking advantage of it. I think it's easy to say, yes, well, this is important, but it's important for those other attorneys. And the truth is, it's important for all of us.
Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we're just done.
Great.
We're great. I think we're
Excellent. Well, thank you all very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.